Before we jump into this how-to video, I first want to make sure that everyone is using the proper safety precautions when diving into anything that's using power tools. So, making sure that you have safety goggles and, you've used and have experience with power tools. So, safety first. So as we jump into this, first thing that we'll want to do is to cut out your frame and then also the pine board that'll be used for your contemplation board. Overall, process should go pretty smoothly if you've mapped out your measurements, which I did earlier, and I'll include at the end of this video. But keep in mind that you can pretty much use your imagination when creating your contemplation board. Most of my process started with just my imagination. I had in mind what I wanted to create, went to the local hardware store and craft store, bought the materials needed, came home, and started building. So as you'll see, putting together the frame was pretty simple, pretty easy, typical of any type of craftsman work that you're putting together. Goes pretty easily, and as you'll see, pretty simple to put together. I am using power tools. You can use the conventional hammer and nails to put it together, but I found that it went a lot quicker using that. All right, once you got your frame pulled together, it's time to start attaching the pine board. I did use pine board, but I mean, you could pretty much use anything. Pine board is a little more expensive. It's about $1.50 to $2 per foot. You could use pretty much any type of material to put it together. The reason why I went with the pine board, I did think that maybe in the future, you could stain it if you'd like, and pine, of course, stains really well. But feel free to use any type of wood to create your slats for the contemplation board. As you'll see, I was trying to determine the width between each board. I thought that I could use, your typical spacers. However, they were just a little too thick and didn't create good enough spacing. So a little bit of ingenuity, found a old piece of paper that created the width that I was looking for, and used those. As I went through, I started to just sand down the edges, just to make it smooth. I did use both a hand sander, but I also had a electric sander as well that I used to sand it down. I did notice with the electric sander that it took off in some places a little more than I wanted, but was able to round out the edges. My belief is that imperfections in art or whatever you're crafting, adds a little bit of character to what you're creating. I then wanted to fill in the nail holes. I thought I would use wood glue. However, the wood glue that I had didn't come out of the bottle as thick as I thought it would. But I had probably a better idea and better option, which is just this nail filler that you would use in drywall, etc., which actually worked really well. So I applied it, allowed it to settle for a little bit. And then once it settled, just took my hand sander and just sanded it down. If you were going to stain it, my recommendation would be to use filling that you could stain. But being that I am going to paint this, it really didn't matter. And, you know, for those perfectionists out there, you'll probably want to add a couple of layers to your hole fills, but I just did one. The next thing I'm doing right now is just taping off a portion of the board that I'm going to use as a chalkboard. So prior to me painting, I wanted to make sure to tape that off. So instead of staining, I decided to paint. So I found a black trash bag, cut it up, and use it as a foundation for spray painting. So I went and get my bench spray painted. Here you'll see pretty straightforward in painting. I actually added 2, possibly 3 coats. So just know that this is the first application, but again, I added a few more coats down the road. The next step is the chalkboard paint. So earlier I taped off the bottom board. It could actually be bottom or top depending on you know, how you create your own contemplation board, but I decided to put it at the bottom, or at least that's my expectation. As I went through this process, you know, I again in my head knew what I wanted to do, but here's a point where I was thinking about, well, how am I going to, you know, paint directly up to the edge without getting the blue portion of the boards covered in chalkboard paint. So I grabbed a Amazon bag and just used it. Again, I think just having a little bit of ingenuity when creating your board, I think, is awesome. And of course, there will be some mistakes as you go, which I encountered one here. As you see the bag, as it starts to fall, and the paint, the blue paint wasn't 100% dry yet. A little bit of the bag kind of peeled off on it. But again, with imperfections come character, which, you know, I could have painted it over, but decided just to leave it. And I'll remember it every time I stare at it at my attempts at perfection. However, did not work out 100%. Now the fun part, great opportunity now to use your imagination, get creative, and, you know, develop the board, the contemplation board that, you know, best speaks to you. You know, as you see, I kind of just placed my photos and the alligator clips in the position, and then just created holes for all of them. I wanted to make sure that my board, again, reflected all the 5 senses that will, you know, quickly get me mindful, you know, of my day. And you know, I'll speak a little later on, you know, how those photos impacted, you know, my 5 senses. So the placement of the clips could go anywhere on your board depending on, you know, the types of photos that you have. You know, I think it would be okay if, you know, your photos flared outside of the board, which would be fine, where mine is a little more symmetrical and kind of stays within the boundaries of the board. But again, if you wanted to, definitely an opportunity for you to show your creativity on that. This was another opportunity for me to use my imagination. You know, with the chalkboard, I wanted to have something on there that I can write, like a quote or a famous saying. I also wanted to add some stenciling to the blackboard portion as well. So as you'll see as I go through my process, I put a little painter's tape there just to help me with centering of what I wanted to write out. I did write the word Contemplatio on a piece of paper, and then as I added the letters, just started Xing them out as I go. I think overall it came out well. The word complatio comes from the Latin word meaning contemplation. So as I think about my contemplation board, I think of Bob Marley. His music really resonates with me. The smell of the ocean brings back memories of my childhood, my parents' embrace, the taste of a fine wine, the mindfulness of Saint Ignatius, and seeing in the sight of my family helps me with contemplation. Listen carefully with the ear of your heart. Thank you.